the most people we've had here at Daniel's house on Sunday night so far. So this is like really cool. And we'll have to figure out over time whether or not we can continue with this amount of space, depending on how many people show up, and then we'll have to maybe make some decisions from there. But anyway, we're going to go ahead, and we're kind of in this kind of progression of talking about the character and the attributes of God, and then we kind of crossed over into other spiritual beings for a little bit, and then now we're back into that's fine. Okay. Anyway, now we're back into the characters and the attributes of God, and we've kind of been moving through a few of those. And tonight we're going to focus on the name that was given to Moses early in the history of Israel for God, simply the word that means Lord, Yahweh. And when we look at that, where's my screen presenter? All right, with that, we ask a question here. This is a common verse we often hear. This is the New International Version. It's from the Ten Commandments, third commandment. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. What do you think of when you think of that verse?
Okay, I got that there. The truth is, thou shalt not use the word God in vain.
Yeah. So what is that? What do we think of? How do we apply that? What does that?
Basically, don't matter.
Don't matter?
When people swear, they say, "God damn it," stuff like that.
Yeah, that's like a lot of what we thought. I was like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to cuss.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not if you want to do if I say gosh darn it, I don't break the commandment or something like that. But when you look at, and we're gonna look at the nature of and how the people of Israel viewed the name of God, and really, it's kind of thing where you go, okay, you're not going to murder people, don't commit adultery, oh yeah, don't cuss. It's like, it kind of just seems a little like, this is the big bad God type thing. Maybe it goes a little deeper than that. And we're going to look at how the name was used. And we will go ahead, and we're going to start with, jump out of the slideshow quickly, and we're going to start with the video from the Bible Project guys on the name Lord, or the name of God.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the second key word here. Lord, written in all capital letters. This is the personal name of Israel's God. We first learn the meaning of this name in the story of Moses and the burning bush in the book of Exodus chapter 3. God appears to Moses and he commissions him to liberate the Israelites from slavery. And so Moses wonders, what if people ask the name of the God who has sent me? And so God responds, tell them, Ehyeh has sent me to you. Now, that Hebrew word Ehyeh means I will be. In other words, God's name means that he is the one who is and who will be. God's existence doesn't depend on anyone or anything else. This God simply is. But it will sound kind of strange for Moses to go say to the Israelites, I will be has sent me to you. Only God can say, I will be. So in the next sentence, God tells Moses the version he should say aloud. Yahweh, the God of our ancestors, he has sent me to you. Now, that word Yahweh is the ancient Hebrew form of the verb he will be. And this is the personal name of the God of Israel. It appears over 6,500 times in the Old Testament. Now, here's what's interesting. Over the centuries, Israelites wanted to honor the sacred nature of this divine name. So, as they read the Hebrew Bible aloud and they came to this name, they stopped saying Yahweh and instead started saying the Hebrew word for Lord, which is Adonai. Now, this practice has been continued throughout the centuries, and so later, when people started translating the Bible into English, they adopted the same practice. Instead of spelling out the divine name, they translated it as Lord, spelled in all capital letters. Okay, you got that? Good, because there's more. Ancient Jewish scribes wanted to prevent anyone from even accidentally saying this name aloud when you read the Hebrew Bible. And so they came up with a visual device to remind you to make sure you say Adonai. They took the 4 consonant letters of the divine name. These letters correspond to our English letters YHWH. Then they inserted the 3 vowels from the word Adonai and combined these together to create an artificial hybrid word, which if you pronounced it, it would say Yahuwah, but no Israelite ever said Yahuwah. It's simply a visual reminder to say the word Adonai. Now, it gets more interesting. Much later, Christian scribes came along who didn't know that Yahuwah was an artificial word, and so they began to say it aloud and spell it in their writings. This is the word that eventually entered into English as Jehovah. It's a word many people still use today. But the main thing is, the word Lord in all capital letters is an indication of the divine name. Don't confuse it with the word Lord in your English translations that's not in all capital letters. That is the actual Hebrew word Adon, which just means Lord or master. This word can refer to people like kings or the master of a servant, even a shepherd over his sheep. And sometimes biblical authors will use this word to refer to God, like in the phrases, the Lord of all the earth, or the Lord of lords. But behind all of these words, Jehovah, Lord, Adonai, stands the original divine name of the God of Israel. It refers to the one who was, who is, and who forever will be.
Thanks for
All right. And then John, we'll come back to the slideshow. So, I mean, you kind of get this, and when you start to really think about how they use this name, it's like, it basically means he will be, he always will be, is what they were saying about God and how they were identifying him. But they so revered his name that they would not even use the word Yahweh when they read the text. They would use other words. They would use Adonai. It's kind of funny. I didn't know the whole thing about it. I mean, I heard Jehovah so many times that then kind of go, oh, that actually is not a real word. It's kind of like, oh, well, we kind of messed that up. But anyway, and there's just this emphasis on revering the name. But it's interesting as you see how it is used. It sometimes takes on this personification throughout the Old Testament, where it seems to go a little deeper, like it's representing the presence of God himself in some of the ways that it's used. So, you can think like you represent something like, I'm a Packer fan. I'm like, Packers. It's like you can kind of go, oh, the Packers are here because I like the Packers or something like that. I don't know. That's probably a little light, but you kind of get the idea. Or you get a player. It's like the minute they take on the name of their team, they represent the team. I'll tell you, in Green Bay, if a player screwed up, everybody knew it. In fact, that's what the coaches would normally warn them when they got there. Say, guys, if you mess up, everybody here is going to know it. You represent the Packers. So anyway, well, we're going to look at a little bit about the history of how the name kind of had this personification sometimes within the history of the Old Testament, and then kind of carried over into a New Testament connection with Jesus here. So somebody want to read, start reading maybe this first part? Go for it, man.
But you are the peace place. The Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go there bring your burnt offering and sacrifice your tithe and specific special gift, what you have vowed to give, and your free will offering, and the firstborn of your birds and flocks. There in the pastures presence of the eating,
Jump up at Lord.
the Lord your God, you and your family shall eat and shall rejoice in everything you have put your hand to, because the Lord your God has blessed you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and continue. So, do you want to read the next one?
Sure. You are not to do as we do here today, everyone doing as they see fit, since you have not yet reached the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God has given you. But you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. And he will give you the rest from all your enemies around you, so that you will live in safety. This is the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name.
So, the next one.
There are you to bring everything I command you, your burnt offering and sacrifices, your tithes, special gifts, and all the choice possessions you have vowed to the Lord, and there rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites from your towns who have no allotment or inheritance of their own. Be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Offer them only at the place of the Lord will choose in one of your tribes, and there observe everything I command you.
So this is basically before the Israelites are going into the promised land. They've been traveling through the wilderness for about 40 years, or for 40 years. And they pretty much have set up wherever the tabernacle was, and the cloud was over the tabernacle, or the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud. That's where the Lord was. And they kind of just did their offerings kind of in different places wherever they were at the time. But God said, no, I'm going to pick some spots. I'm going to pick a specific place within this land that's where I will choose to put my name. I'm going to place my name on that city. And that will be the city that represents my presence. And so he basically was saying, this will mark you as my people, that my name will be on this place. And eventually, I mean, at first it was, trying to think where they had the tabernacle at first. Eventually it ended up in Jerusalem, though, when they built the temple. But God designated a place. And it would be a place where they felt God's presence, or that represented God's presence among them. And it's interesting how the name really kind of becomes the symbol of his presence. It talks about how he will be in this place because of his name. The name also became kind of an identifying factor for the people of Israel, that they were unique. Gerhard von Rad is a German theologian from the mid-20th century. I think he died in 71. And in his Old Testament theology, he wrote this, which was about 1962, I think it said, the name Yahweh was committed in trust to Israel alone among the nations. In it alone lay the guarantee of Yahweh's nearness and of his readiness to help. His name shared, this name shared directly in Yahweh's own holiness, for indeed it was, so to speak, a double of his being. And so it had to be treated as holy in the hearts of Israel's worship. To call on the name of Yahweh was the equivalent to true worship. It identified them as being people that worship this one true God. And as we progress through the story of Israel, you see different times. You almost see this parallel again between his name and his presence. And then you get to the New Testament, Jesus comes, and really the name, the presence of God and the identifying mark of God moves away from a place to people. Somebody want to read? This is from Jesus' high priestly prayer in John 17 in Gethsemane, the night before he was crucified. So we want to read this first part?
I have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. They were yours. You gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. For I gave them the word you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainly that I came from you, and they believed that you sent me. I pray for them, and I'm not praying for the world, but those you have given me, for those.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you got it. Someone read this last part?
All I have is yours, and all you have is mine, and glory has come to me through them. I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me.
So Jesus identifies that God placed his name upon himself as the only begotten Son of God, or the unique Son of God. And he's praying this, and he's talking to God the Father. And he says, in that, he's kind of communicating this transfer of God, you came to earth, or Father, you came to earth through me. And now we've been dwelled this place. And I'm going to pass it on to these people as they carry on. As you look throughout the whole of his prayer, he talks about how he's passing on that name to them, that presence to them, that they would carry that name with them as they move through the earth. And it was that name that would protect them, particularly in a spiritual realm, from harm. It was also, again, that name that would identify them, just as it identified Jesus. Like Israel, they were being set apart, and everybody now who is followers of Jesus is being set apart, identified by the presence of God, as symbolized through his name being placed on us. So let's look back at that command again. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. The interesting thing is when you look at it in a literal translation, it says, don't carry the name, don't hold the name, don't bear the name in vain. He's basically saying, what God probably was saying there is, I'm identifying you with me. This was part of the covenant that he first spoke to Israel, and then he carries on to us. And basically, as they represented God and Yahweh to the world, to their neighbors around them, how they related to the people around them demonstrated how they were representing God. So they were misusing, if they were misusing his name, they were carrying his name in vain. It's how their life represented him. And for us, it becomes really this big issue of how do we represent Jesus? If we carry the name of Jesus with us, how do we represent him when we're out in the world and dealing with people in our day-to-day life? You know, I kind of remember a story. This time when I was out back when I was campus minister in Minnesota, and there's this one church pastor who was fairly well known around the area at the time, and people had said, "Yeah, you should get him on your board." And so I included him on my board, and we were out doing a tour of the campus one day. He wanted to talk about it a little bit. And as we're out on tour, they were in the middle of a construction project. And he gets a phone call. They were going to be leasing space in the strip mall or something like that. He gets a phone call from the developer, the secretary, and there were apparently some issues going on. He got really tense with her. And I'm sitting here going, how is that representing Jesus to that woman? I mean, yeah, that's the way the world acts in business deals. But are we to act that way? And I think we have to think about that. How do we represent Jesus to the world around us? Because I think whenever we carry his name and we try to associate what we're doing with his name, if we're doing things that don't actually represent him and don't value the things that he values, we probably are guilty then of really carrying his name in vain. And that goes a little bit beyond just, not saying a swear word every once in a while. So let's talk about it. What kind of stands out as you think about this, some of these verses, some of the things we talked about here? Or what questions does it raise for you?
Like saying you're a believer, you gotta actually live like one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
I think it's interesting too, it's not just us at a personal level, that I think it's, you should also be looking at your church. Like when we were this morning, the listeners, I think they're an excellent example of how, they represent the name of God in the work that they do in the church, in their community, and commitment to get back to it. So, if I'm participating in, something that is representing me, such as the church, the name of God, that I need to make sure that, that that's really happening. Or that commitment is really there.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to that. How we interact with the people around, and how we represent in the city. Right now we got a lot of. I honestly say we have some churches that are kind of showing an attitude, and it gets to be troubling. They look at things like safety measures, like social distancing and masks and things like that, and like, oh, you can't tell us to do that. And I'm like, how does that play to your neighbors? I was actually just noticing on Facebook, a relative in Wisconsin was kind of joking about how, like, what's with all these people being afraid to be taking his kids to some play area and there was hardly anybody there. It's like kind of making a joke about it. And I'm like, one of his friends commented, said, my neighbor's kid is in the hospital right now. I'm not bringing my kids anywhere. I'm like going, yeah, you got to think about how you're representing Jesus right now. Type thing, your neighbor. Those are the type of things we got to think about.
I really think I agree with you. It really pushes you to be more mindful. I think and more deliberate. Because if every time you go into a situation, new or old, you're going in, representing the Lord. If you know that that's the humanity He's given us, we have to figure out if we start something new, we have to look for how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to behave in His way in that environment. that it forces us to, to pray on those issues, to really to think on them, read the word, to try to find and discern what he really means in those moments. And I think in other moments, like maybe moments that we don't normally think about him being there or about being a representative. Like, we don't, it's like your example, but we don't know what's going to be a representative. So whenever, quieting the circle, you really start to encompass more of your life under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I'm thinking about it even and going, I think historically how Christianity has been represented to other cultures in North America. I think of how Africans were brought here as slaves, really, and sometimes the church just kind of winked at it. And I'm like, that's not right. That misrepresented Jesus. Or how the natives were treated in the name of God. And some people kind of still have this glory view of the past of like, oh, but we brought Christianity to them. They were blessed. And I'm like, maybe they didn't feel blessed.
Well, not only that, is that they didn't think about it. Like, to the slaves, what they told them is that you'll be free. Like, we're not going to set you free. We're not going to treat you well. We'll be free only when, only when you get to God. Right. So we're not going to do what God tells us here. We're just going to do whatever we want. But, but God will, take care of you. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the natives. I think, what they told them is like, he'll settle you down. That's what they realized. People love what they said to them. It's like he'll purify you of all your wicked ways, and what they consider wicked ways were things that were part of their culture. And it's like that's the lesson that they learned. It's like even if they followed because they knew that they would be persecuted, it's like did they really follow in their hearts? Yeah, right. I think that's what he's telling us is to really push for the heart and soul of the people around you.
Leon, I was watching TV yesterday, and remember last time I told you about a preacher taking a gun in a church? Well, last night, this is in Detroit, okay? This is in Detroit. A preacher walked in a church, and the whole audience was there and had a gun firing it up in the air.
Whoa. That's crazy.
I've seen that.
That's weird. That is weird.
I'm like,
and again, that then to people's minds is Jesus.
Hmm.
And it becomes bearing his name in vain. Bearing his name in a vain way.
That's just like going around and saying his name in vain. I mean, anytime you're doing something, even wrong in the Lord's house, you're doing something in vain towards the Lord himself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm like, well, what's the church is turning on us now?
Yeah.
I was thinking that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the challenge we have to have. The challenge we have to live with is how does Diakonos as a community represent Jesus in Indianapolis?
I think that means, what does it mean?
Yeah.
As far as, the worldview, if Christians as believers of church, if they're acting the same way as the world is not going to pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's going to be like, they're just like us. Like, if I would want to change, like they say, they're just like us.
Exactly. Yeah. Very excellent.
Yeah. That's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I don't know. I think if you want to know what God is telling us to do with Diakonos, I think it's to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first and foremost. I think in any church and organization today is because we've got this idea that's been perpetuated that Christians are perfect, and while we're supposed to push for perfection, we are not perfection. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody deserves, including ourselves, when we try to be other than that, in process, people that we're going to be. Because when we tell, I can say, well, yeah, I found Jesus, but it's like you need to say, well, how did you find Jesus? Like how, tell them the ugly, nasty stuff that brought you to him, or that moment where you believe, that aha moment, or what got you there. And like, so if we're honest with those moments, and are the moments where we fall a little bit back, but we come back, and why we come back. Is that if we were really going to be good stewards of his name.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I had a experience this week, email I got over the weekend. I'm doing some recruiting work for Communitas on the North American level, meeting with people that are considering joining us and things like that, just trying out, virtually, obviously, even without COVID, you're spread all over North America. You can't exactly, we were talking to somebody in Los Angeles earlier this week. Can't fly out to LA just for a quick conversation. But it's one young lady that's been kind of connecting with us and doing a discovery group with myself and a few other people. She made a decision. She was thinking about taking a position in Germany with another church there, but still maybe keeping a relationship with Communitas. And she was going through that phase of really wondering, really being disillusioned by the church in America. And she said in her email, she said, at the time that we all talked a little bit, and it was just you, I, and Darren, my co-leader in recruiting. It was just refreshing to see people who see the same frustration, but aren't responding with bitterness, but instead are choosing to mobilize towards action and trying to build something different. And I think that's part of what we have to do in this, because we can be all frustrated and angry about what we see going on in our country. But if we can't represent a better way of life, then we really aren't representing Jesus to our nation and to our neighbors.
I think the reference back to today at Lyndhurst, as we're celebrating our the 100th centennial. I mean, the pastor asked us on to number one to ask what we would pray for from God. And then on one side of our heart, and on the other side, he asked us what we are going to do. And I think that's almost locked in step. It's like on one hand you pray to God, but then you start after you pray to God, you start looking for God's response and how you're going to do. Like, what am I going to do? And it's real small stuff, I think. Like, we're all looking for these those Jonah moments, and I just don't think they're always going to be Jonah moments. I think there are a lot of the way God speaks to us is just like Leon was saying, how do you talk to somebody on the phone? How do you deal with being angered at the store? Like, how do you deal with that? It's like, are you just going to say, somebody doesn't push their card in? Like, do I get angry and yell at them and, push their card into their car, or do I just go and take it, and put it back for them? Like, so which do I want to bring into the world?
Exactly. Okay, why don't we take some time to